Around the time of World War I, more specifically on October 28th of 1918, Czechoslovakia was officially declared its own nation. Tomáš Garád was one of the founders and the first president of this new nation. The three main treaties that affected Czech were the Treaty of Versailles, the Treaty of Saint-Germain, and the Treaty of Trianon. One of the biggest positives that came out of the Treaty of Versailles was Czechoslovakia gaining territory from land that had previously been under the rule of Hungary and Austria. Due to the fact that Czech was recognized by the Allied forces before the Paris Peace Treaty Conference, when the lines were redrawn at the conference, Czech was given territory. The positives of the Treaty of Saint-Germain was the solidification that the Allied forces and Austria recognized Czech as an independent nation. The positives of the Treaty of Trianon was that Czech gained more territory, including Slovakia. A more indirect negative effect of the Treaty of Versailles occurred when a lot of German-speaking people ended up in Czech when the borders were redrawn. This became an issue in World War II because Czech became targeted by Germany because of their large German-speaking population. The Treaty of Trianon and Saint-Germain lacked larger negative effects for Czech, but they did build tensions within nations because Czech was continuously gaining land. Czech liked the treaties because with each treaty they were gaining land as well as more official stance as they were growing. At the same time, the Allied forces were assisting Czech in their as they were gaining their territory and land, and they helped them to protect it. So they were gaining powerful allies within the European community at the time.
Now moving to Poland, which had two big treaties that were the Treaty of Versailles, specifically the Little Treaty of Versailles, and the Treaty of Saint-Germain Onlay. The Little Treaty of Versailles, which was signed on June 28, 1919, and gave the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth their independence after 123 years of partitions, also gave them considerable amounts of German minorities inside their new borders. Now, within this treaty, there were many positives, significantly because after 100 years of being governed over, Poland finally regained their independence and self-governance. Also, Poland was allowed to make their own decisions about their own inhabitants, and therefore the minority groups within the country had more of a voice in the League of Nations and with the new laws created in Poland. While there were still adversity between different social groups, especially the German minorities, overall there were more significant improvements to the Polish citizens' representation in the League of Nations that would later translate to their easy acceptance into the United Nations and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Although there were many great advantages to the Little Treaty of Versailles, nations often did not come into existence without some negatives. And in Poland's case, the main negative being that in agreement with being declared an independent country, they must take part of the Russian debts from World War I, along with declaring in the treaty that the most favored nations are the Allied and associated states. Comparatively, though, these are insignificant non-issues that are no matter to Poland in comparison to gaining independence. Now, for the Treaty of Saint-Germain-en-Laye, which was signed on September 10, 1919 by the Allies of World War I, aka France, Britain, Russia, Italy, Japan, and the US, the treaty was signed against the Republic of German Austria. This essentially dissolved the Austrian half of the former republic and established it as a part of many other nations, including Czechoslovakia and Poland. And this is where larger political and social unrest can be seen within Poland. Due to Poland's still majority agricultural industry, there was a strive for renovation and advancements in the Polish economy. Along with that, there were parts of the treaty that said that the old territory of Habsburg monarchy was to be annexed and reestablished as part of the Polish Republic. This is significant because it shows how easily the nations were mixed up during all of the treaty signings. Because of the Treaty of Saint-Germain-en-Laye, many Germans and Austrians ended up within the borders of this new Poland. This was approximately 190,000 Austrians and about 150,000 Germans who ended up being relocated inside of Poland. This continued to cause unrest within the nation that was displayed in riots all throughout Poland by Germans and Austrians in the 1920s to 1930s.
The most obvious similarities between Poland and Czechoslovakia have to do with their locations. Both nations' borders were partially defined by the Treaty of Saint-Germain. This is because both nations were made of land that formerly belonged to the German and Austro-Hungarian empires, as seen in the overlaid maps on the right. These similarities led to less obvious similarities, such as their minority populations. There was a large minority of German-speaking people in both countries after World War I, whom faced persecution and discrimination due to their heritage. Another similarity between Poland and Czechoslovakia has more political than social significance. Both nations, although in different ways, were formed on the pretext that the nations would favor the Allied and associated powers to the Central Powers. While this did secure powerful allies for the new nations, it placed dangerous strain on their relations with the Central Powers, which were their immediate neighbors.
One of the most obvious differences is the amount of land that Poland and Czechoslovakia got compared to each other, and what territorial advantages or disadvantages they had. Czechoslovakia was a somewhat smaller nation in the middle of Europe compared to Poland, which put Czechoslovakia in a risky position for border conflicts since it was so close to multiple other nations, most notably Germany and Poland. Additionally, Czechoslovakia was landlocked, and unlike Poland, they didn't have access to a seaport for trading, making it difficult to establish their economy after World War I and form relations with the US and Britain. While Czechoslovakia was recognized as a part of the League of Nations and declared an independent country along with Poland, Czechoslovakia struggled to build capital and unite their multi-ethnic population in order to gain the attention of other nations, which perpetuated ethnic tensions that escalated in the years to follow. Another key difference was the amount of internal dissent in both countries after World War I. Due to the redistribution of Austrian and Hungarian land from the Treaty of Saint-Germain Onlay and the Treaty of Trianon, both countries faced ethnic tensions at home, making it difficult to establish a stable government after 1918. However, Poland had significantly more political issues with its neighbors in contrast to Czechoslovakia. Poland had to take on part of Russia's debt as per the Treaty of Versailles, but they also redeveloped a strong sense of nationalism due to having been reformed from prior to World War I, as opposed to starting brand new as a country, which was the case with Czechoslovakia. Both of these were factors that led to the Polish-Soviet War of 1920, led by de facto chief of state Józef Pilsudski. Poland also had border conflicts with Czechoslovakia from 1919 onward, claiming that there were many Polish-speaking people within Czechoslovakia and a minority of Czech and German people, which set up future tensions for World War II.